Welcome to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. I'm Christian of Standing Stones Healing, founder of the Reiki Business Collective and creator of the Build Your Reiki Business program, sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Greetings, welcome, and thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. It's Christian of Standing Stones Healing. Thank you for being here. I'm truly honored to have you. In this week's episode, we're talking about taxes. It's tax time! Hooray! Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, it's just the end of the year. It's not tax time yet. That doesn't happen until next year. Well, true, tax time is April 15th, but it's so very important for us to be preparing at the end of the year for when taxes are due. Now, if you are not a US-based Reiki business, this episode is going to focus on taxes for US Reiki businesses. However, the first part of the episode pertains to everyone, no matter where you are in the world. And so you are welcome to stick with us for the first part of the episode. I am going to share a few tips specifically for US Reiki business owners, but those come a little bit later. The first thing that I want to encourage you to do, though, is that at the end of the year, to make sure that you are spending time focusing in on the year's income and expenses. Now, I talked about this a little bit in last week's episode on end of year preparations. So end of year review. And it's one of the three things that I encourage all Reiki business owners to focus on at the end of the year. So whether you do end of year business reflections or not, that episode includes the three things I really encourage all of us to do in our Reiki business, no matter what. But focusing in on your income and expenses is one of those things. And it's one of those things because it is essential for us in our Reiki business to know where we stand financially. I cannot tell you the number of Reiki business owners I've had discussions with who really don't know exactly where their business stands financially, or they are afraid to do an assessment of their income and expenses, or at tax time, they simply hand over everything to their accountant and pretty much say, you deal with it. I mean, that's what we pay an accountant for, right? Yes, and it's so very important for us to know where our books stand for our Reiki business. Now, one of the reasons it is so important is that money is the lifeblood of our Reiki business. Now, whether we want to admit it or not, money is really important to our Reiki business. Now, I don't know about you. I'm not in it for the money. Probably you're not either. Even if you are looking at a Reiki business as a way to make extra money, a side hustle to supplement your income, maybe to help you save up for an important purchase, or as a way to help you transition into ditching your 9-to-5 and going full-time with your Reiki business. Even if all of those things are true, typically, generally speaking, when we start a Reiki business, we're not focusing first and foremost on getting rich. Most of us, probably you too, are really focusing on the ways that we can serve, our desire to help people with Reiki, and the fact that we want to make the world a better place. But if we want to have a Reiki business, and if we want to serve more people, and if we want to help people, and if we want to continue to do that, we need money in order to be able to do it. Now, I've talked about this in other podcast episodes. You can feel free to check those out. Podcast episode on money. I'll drop the link down below. I've got a couple of podcast episodes on money and the importance of money and how essential it is to our Reiki business. But it's really important for us to know what our Reiki business financial books look like, because that money is so important to our Reiki business. And so at the end of the year, I want to encourage you to be on top of your Reiki business books. Now, if you've been doing it right all year, you know where your business is financially, and you don't have to put in a lot of time or effort on maintaining, reviewing your Reiki business books. I recommend approaching this kind of like brushing your teeth. You know, if you brush your teeth every day, it goes a long way in taking good care of your teeth. And brushing your teeth a couple of times a day for a couple of minutes a day is so much more helpful to the health of your teeth than brushing your teeth for like half an hour on one day a week. But yet, this is what many of us do in our Reiki business, is that we don't pay any attention to the money until we need to spend a lot of time doing it. It becomes a real headache, and it's also not the healthiest for our Reiki business. One of the reasons this is so important is because when it comes time for our taxes, it makes our life so much easier. And so no matter where you are in the world and no matter what it looks like to do your Reiki business taxes, I want to encourage all of us to be aware of our Reiki business income and expenses throughout the whole year, and especially at the end of the year, to be making sure that we know exactly what those numbers are. Now, I encourage us to spend some purposeful and intentional time doing this at the end of the year, because this is when the tax year ends. And so if you are a US-based Reiki business, probably like most businesses in the world, though I'm not going to pretend to know anything about taxes in other parts of the world, but here in the US, our business tax year runs from January 1st through December 31st. And so that means that at the end of December 31st, the tax year is over. And any money that we have received or spent up until December 31st is within that tax year. So that means that we don't have to wait until just 2 days before April 15th to figure out our Reiki business taxes for the year, to figure out our income and expenses for the last year. Indeed, we can have all that done on January 1st. Now, one important tax reason to do our income and expenses earlier than after the year is over in our Reiki business is because we have up until December 31st to make purchases in our Reiki business and have them count as part of the tax year. And so one thing that is important for us to know as US-based Reiki businesses is that we have up until December 31st to make purchases in our Reiki business. Now, what this means is that if you need to make a purchase, if you need to spend money, or if you want to spend money in your Reiki business, you have until December 31st to do that of that current tax year. This can be really helpful if your Reiki business had some unexpected income and you will have a higher amount of taxes you'll have to pay than you expected. This can be really helpful if you are anticipating some different kinds of expenses or income for the next tax year, and you want some of your purchases to be on the current tax year. So this is a great thing for us to know in our Reiki business to be able to prepare for. And so if there's something that you want to purchase in your Reiki business and you want to make that purchase in this current tax year, you have until December 31st to do that. And it's helpful to be able to know whether or not a certain purchase would be advantageous to do it in the current tax year or to wait until the next tax year, depending upon the purchase, the amount, and your Reiki business income and expenses. I know I personally like to have a clear idea as the end of the year approaches what my business is looking at in terms of income and expenses and taxable income, so that if I want to make any additional purchases and reduce my Reiki business's net income for the current tax year, I can make sure to make any purchases I need to by the end of the calendar year. So that's tax tip number 1, is to start your taxes before the year even ends in terms of knowing exactly what your income and expenses are, knowing exactly what your business's net taxable income is, and knowing any purchases that you might like or need to make by the end of the calendar year and making them. Now, again, you might be thinking, oh, Christian, my accountant takes care of all of that. Yes, indeed. But many Reiki business owners really don't have much interaction or contact with their accountant until it's tax time, or even maybe they don't have an accountant, but they have a tax preparer, and they only have contact with that tax preparer at tax time, and really, in a sense, kind of give away their power to their tax preparer or accountant in terms of the knowledge of knowing tax information and knowing where their Reiki business stands financially. And I am a firm believer in knowing that information for ourselves as Reiki business owners, and indeed even knowing some of the details about how it all works as well. Just because we have an accountant doesn't mean that we don't need to know or shouldn't know how it all works, and knowing important things like our business's income and expenses. Now, tip number 2 for tax time to get you ready to file your Reiki business taxes by April 15th. Well, it's a different deadline if you have an S Corp, but most Reiki businesses in the US do have pass-through taxation. But tip number 2 is if you earned $400 or more in your Reiki business, you need to report that to the IRS. And so if in 2024 you earned $400 or more through your Reiki business, you need to report that on your tax return. You need to claim that income to the IRS because you're going to need to pay taxes on it. Probably. I mean, if you took a loss, that's one thing. But indeed, if you earned $400 or more in your Reiki business, you're going to need to include that on your taxes. So if you are a brand new Reiki business owner, let's say in 2024, you just started accepting payment for your Reiki services. And let's say that maybe you're just doing it on the weekends, maybe out of a spare bedroom in your house, or you're just traveling to friends, or maybe you're taking some sessions on Zoom, and you aren't really doing it that often. Do I even need to tell the IRS? Yes, you do, if you are earning $400 or more as a new Reiki business owner just starting out. Now, if you've earned less than $400, then you're safe. Now, this is gross. This is gross. Yeah. I mean, it's not gross to earn money from Reiki. This is your gross income. So this is before your Reiki business expenses. And so your gross Reiki business income, if it totals $400 or more, you need to be including that on your taxes and informing the IRS. And so, of course, this amount might be different if you have expenses that you are deducting from that $400, but indeed, $400 or more, you need to include that on your taxes. Now, maybe you can begin to see why I'm such an advocate of keeping track of all of our Reiki business income and expenses throughout the year, because $400 in our Reiki business can add up pretty quickly. You know, a $50 session here, another $30, $40, $100 session there. Over the course of a year, it really does add up. And before you know it, you can be earning $400 in a calendar year in your Reiki business. And so if from January 1st through December 31st, you earned $400 or more as a US-based Reiki business, a US-based Reiki solopreneur, a US-based Reiki freelancer, whatever you want to call yourself, the IRS wants to know. Now, number 3 reason why it is so important for us to do our end of the year review of our Reiki business income and expenses is because if you owe the IRS too much money, you will pay a penalty. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to pay the IRS any more money than I have to. And when we owe more than $1,000 to the IRS, we indeed can pay a penalty. Now, I say can because there are some exceptions and loopholes to this. I won't get into the details, but if you are an established Reiki business and you're paying estimated quarterly taxes, then this is a way to avoid any kind of penalty. But if you haven't been paying the IRS any kind of estimated tax throughout the year, and you earn money in your Reiki business enough that you owe the IRS $1,000 or more in taxes at tax time, then the chances are pretty good that you're going to pay a penalty. Now, I know about this because it happened to me years ago on my Reiki business journey. I owed the IRS $1,000 and I had to pay a penalty. I had no idea that this was going to happen. And I even had a financial guy who didn't even tell me that this was going to happen. Believe me, I fired him. But it was a surprise to me. Thankfully, it was only $1,000 and not more. And that meant that my penalty was actually very small. I think my penalty was like $26, but it was enough to learn my lesson. And so I'm always very keen to pass that on when it comes to talking about Reiki business, finances, taxes, and the like, is that if you owe too much at tax time, you can pay a penalty. And so it's very important for us to know whether or not that might be the case before December 31st so that we can make some adjustments to our expenses to help maybe alleviate some of that tax burden that we might owe, or indeed to simply make a payment to the IRS before December 31st. Now, if you are listening to all of this and you're saying, oh my God, I'm so confused, you're not alone. Taxes are a scary kind of thing. And the last thing that we want is to make a mistake. The last thing that we want is to get in trouble. The last thing that we want is to go to jail. And that's why I created the Reiki Business Tax Class. It's for US-based Reiki business owners, and it explains all of this. Now, of course, I am not an accountant. I am not a tax lawyer. I am not a tax professional. I am not a tax preparer. I am not your tax professional. And as a Reiki business owner, I know a thing or two about navigating Reiki business taxes. And so I break it all down for you and explain it all. So everything I've just talked about in this episode is all contained in my tax class. You can learn more at standingstoneshealing.com/tax class. It's a self-paced video training with information on understanding how US-based Reiki business federal taxes work. It also contains bonus information on sales tax and VAT, value added tax, for US-based Reiki businesses if we are selling to clients outside of the US. If you are interested in understanding how taxes work, I do believe it is essential for us as Reiki business owners to know this information, even when we do have our own accountants, our own tax preparers, and our own tax professionals to know this information. But now is indeed the time to learn it at the end of the year, to understand how it all works, so that when April 15th rolls around, you are all set and you get how it works and you are not losing any sleep and you're not worried about going to jail. At least not over your Reiki business taxes. Are you prepared for your taxes? Are you ready for tax time? You know, we think that tax time isn't until April, but indeed tax time starts January 1st. And so you too can be ready with confidence about your Reiki business taxes. Sending so many blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business and indeed to your Reiki business taxes. Thanks for tuning in to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, and send to a friend. Learn more about the Build Your Reiki Business program at standingstoneshealing.com/build, sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business.